Okay, so we're back here, and from the last video, the listeners were acting up. In particular, I was returning a null value and they were crashing. We're going to solve that. We're not only going to solve that, but we're going to solve this entire mess that you see here. So you see multiple different checks, multiple different loops, different things here. We're going to create ourselves a custom iterator. What an iterator is, for those who are not familiar with programming, it's basically an object that's designed to tell me what comes next in the list. In other words, it iterates through things, or it goes through things. You can see an iterator perfectly here with this right here. This returns a list. A list is an iterable object that contains an iterator, and you call and you get its iterator, and it'll loop through. A for loop, it basically takes an iterator and it turns it into something easier to use. So you go your next object. This is your next object every single time you go through a loop. So you'll go through the loop, come through next object, go through loop, next object, so and so. So we want to create something that we can stick in here, and it will handle our block calls, our tile listener calls, and our node calls, all in the same loop with minimum additions or changes. And that will cut down on a large sum of code in here, because after all, this class file is almost hitting 1,000, and we want to cut that back down. And anytime we want to implement a listener, we just want to be able to go, okay, here's our iterator, and go ahead and do your thing. Of course, it will not function the same way as a for loop will, because we need to do a little bit of extra with it, but there might be a way to get around that. We'll toy with it here real quick, and we'll go as we find things. Play by the ear, in other words. So I do have iterators already built into Volt's engine. I've got an iterator for the inventory. So we're going to go find my inventory iterator. We're going to take a look at it, see how I implemented it, and hopefully do the same thing, or do something similar. Now the inventory iterator is designed to iterate over an inventory and ignore empty slots. I specifically designed it that way, so that way I can find all of my cool stuff that I want to get. There is also a version that it iterates over empty slots only, and not full slots, to help improve performance. It does the same check, so it doesn't really actually change performance any, but it saves on amount of code being written. So here's an iterator, really straightforward. You go, okay, we're an iterator, we're an iterable. In order to be used in a for loop, it has to be iterable, I think. Actually, one of these two says what it is. So iterator is our basic thing, which just has next, remove, and oh yeah, here's our for each remaining. And then iterable gets our iterator, and also does, this is where our for each actually is. There's also some other stuff here. These are part of Java 8. There's probably a Java 7 equivalency to them. So in here we've got our next statement, or has next, our next, and our remove, and of course our iterator. We want primarily these three. These two are designed to get slot IDs, pretty much. So if you get your slot ID, you want to know what slot we're currently at. Because when you get the has next, it'll actually get you your next slot, and it'll go, yeah, here's your next slot. And when you call next, it accesses the slot and everything. But you want to know what your slot is, not what's in the slot, so you would call slot. And then has next slot will actually tell you what your next slot is, but it won't actually change anything. So if you're in slot 3, but when you know what the next slot is, you would go slot 4. Yeah. The reason why this is separated is because our next full slot could actually be from, instead of it being 3, would be our current slot. Our next one being 4, it could actually be 10, because the next slot is until 10. And that's actually handled right here. There's a few different ways. So we need to implement an iterator, and we need to implement it somewhere where we can find it again. So actually prefabs is where we want to be. We want to go to tile, and we would go to listeners, because we're going to make a listener iterator. And the reason we're doing this is because the alternative method to this one is I make a list, I dump objects in the list, and then I iterate the list. That creates junk objects every single time you iterate, which is not performance friendly. With an iterator, you save on performance by not having to do a whole bunch of extra work. In this case, I think I just want iterable. And of course, we don't want item stacks, so we're going to hit cancel when I dump that there. This is going to be tile listener, or event listener. Now we're going to implement our methods. Okay, that's the wrong one. I need iterator. iterable gives you back your iterator thing. Yeah, we'll go ahead and implement this. I got a way to make it work. Because I was thinking, like, I need to make a custom one. So what I was going to end up doing is implementing iterator, and I was going to end up taking the interfaces off because etc. reasons. But I have a way to fix it, and I'll show this in like a second. Okay. So when we go to construct an iterator, we can actually tell it how we want to construct an iterator. So we want to implement this iterator with our location. That way, and we can actually do this world position. Oh, come on. There we go. Implement methods. And then we can do a few other things here. So we can go, okay, world. Yeah, we got to just store everything real quick. Probably should store these as doubles, but I don't really care to right now. Right now it works because almost all the events we're firing are based on the current block location and not some world location. This will have to change eventually, but we could just make a separate system for that. And then I need to make these final. Okay, so that stores our location, then we come down here, of course we feed it back into the method. So we want to access the methods directly as it works out that way. I also need to really quickly duplicate these and do the integer versions of these just to save on just a very small amount of performance. That's the wrong, I didn't want to edit that one, I want to edit this one. Okay. The reason I'm doing it this way is the defaults for the world location class, actually the pos3d class, auto convert from double to int for you. That way you don't have to do it. If I actually go to this, I can show this. So it auto does your float and it auto does the integer, but it does this using a floor method, which means this is a bit slow. So if you can avoid that, best avoid that. It'll run a little bit faster. We're going to go ahead and pass this in, and this should work on most of the systems. There are a couple listeners where I need something different than this, and that means we can't use this one precisely. There's going to be some handling here. By the way, I actually don't need the iWorld position, I just wanted the methods. Yeah, I don't know why I did that. I'm like, here, we put iWorld position here, we'll go from there. And playing it by the ear necessarily doesn't always work out. Okay, so we got those. So we want to know what our next one is. So how we're going to do this is our tile entity is going to be 0. Then our block listeners. Actually, it's going to go tile, then node, then something. So has next. So we got to figure out what we're going to do for has next. We're going to have to keep track of an index. So our index equals 0. And then we're going to do some system here. So we're going to go index equals 0. Then, of course, it's going to be probably didn't think this through all the way. So we want to return back objects, not exactly listeners. I don't actually, that'll work. So what we need to do is we need to go, okay, if, so we go tile entity, tile equals, we're going to need a get method here actually. So we need public. The reason why I'm doing it this way is when I go to add support for iBlock access, we can't just call world because it doesn't exactly exist in all cases. So we're going to want to make sure we differentiate with that. Yeah, if you watch my older videos with the listener system, I do that exact thing. Yeah, so it should work. So we just return tile. We cast it real quick. And then we go, okay, so that's index 1. Then index 2 is our node. Or index 1 is our node. So we're going to go, okay, if this is an instance of itile node host, then we want to return .get node. And then we cast it to event handler. And we return null if we don't got anything. Our next method will get rid of the fact that we have to worry about nulls, because we don't care about indexes. So we're treating this almost exactly like a linked list. For those who don't know the difference between a linked list and a normal list you go from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Linked list you do still go from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, but you don't keep track of those numbers. What you keep track of is, okay, you've got the first entry, he then knows what entry 1 is, but he doesn't know what entry 2, 3, and 4 are. So entry 1 knows what entry 2 is, entry 2 knows what entry 3 is, and they go backwards too. So entry 3 knows what entry 2 was because there can be double connected. Not always double connected, sometimes they're single connected. Array lists actually don't have any idea what's next to them, but they're set up in such a way that 0 is always 0, 1 is always 1. With a linked list, I can go, okay, we got 0 and 1, I want to insert an element between those. And I can put it in there, and now everything changes indexes, but you don't actually change the index because there is no index relationship there. It simply knows what's next in the list. Very good for actually calling the next method here. Very bad for actually for loop and iteration and all kinds of stuff. If you want to find what is at index number 3, you actually have to go from 0, 1, 2, and then 3. There are workarounds around this, of course. There's a lot of ways to make that performant. This is where we get a little bit of fun now. So we go else. Now we want to go index I equals index minus 2. So this would be 0, 1, and the next element will be 2. So we want to get our actual index here. So we want to go, okay, if index is less than, we need to pass actually more stuff back in here than I thought. So private block base block. So you need this guy, and this will go here. This will be replaced by an interface later. Right now we're just going to do it the lazy way because I don't feel like making a lot of interfaces and then recoding things and making sure things are set up correctly, because as you've seen me relearn this repeatedly, even though I've been doing this for 7 years, many programmers make this mistake. We get ahead of ourselves. We go down and keep making more and more changes to the code, and then we go, well, we've now made a mountain of changes without testing things. We want to make sure we're testing one thing at a time. So we go blockbase.listeners.size. So we want to make sure that we're less than our size. If we are, we want to return we need one more thing in here. Listeners are key based. I almost neglected that. Okay. So you want to go listeners. Oh wow, this is gonna suck so much. Okay. In this case, if we know we're less than the size, we literally just want to go like this and then get 0. Or not get 0, get I. And this is also I. Then we would go else. So else, if we're either the original listener is null or something else, we want to go, okay, if I tile, or no, if we want to go, no, what, we need to cache the tile entity. Also, by the way, I'm installing the original StarCraft right now. It is sitting here installing. Ah, it just finished. We're going to be playing that here later. I grew up playing this game, by the way, which is the reason why I'm installing it. It's going to be one of those nostalgic moments. With it only being a couple gigs in size, everybody can download it. With it being designed for computers built in like '95, everybody can run it, which means I can get all of my buddies to play it, because especially they made it free, which is absolutely amazing. I have mad respect for Blizzard and what they do, because they actually take time to do stuff like that. You know what we can do in the tile method here? We can cache our tile entity. So we're going to do that real quick. So I'm going to go private tile entity tile. Because the tile shouldn't change between these calls. So we want to go, okay, if tile equals null, we're going to get the tile. If not, return tile. Because then this lets me call tile method without going like, I'm accessing the world repeatedly. I don't have to worry about that. So this will be tile equals world.getTileID xi, yi, zi. And of course we would add the I block access here in a bit. In this case we're going to go, okay, tile is instance of I tile with listeners. Then we want to get the listeners. So we want to do basically what we did up here. I'm going to actually code this one out a little bit better. I'm going to redo the one above us in a second too. Actually, I'm not going to redo the one above us. There's no point. Okay, that should handle everything. And then we need to get the has next thing. So this is our current index. This is our next index. How are we doing our inventory iterator? Are we actually iterating? Yeah, there is actually a system here for when we get the next slot and we up the slot count. That means in our listener here, we actually need to be doing something like this. I tile event listener return, or re is how you actually do it. Because you can't type return or it'll error. So we want to go re equals okay. And then right down here we go okay index equals next index. That should work. Where's my inventory iterator? Slot equals next slot. Okay, then we iterate the next index up. Okay. And then what we want to do in has next is we want to basically skip nulls. So we want to go while, and let me open the iterator because I can just copy how the iterator is doing it. Iterator gets stack and slot. So we just do a null check in here. So we go, okay, if the next slot is null. So we go, we can't just call next. You know what we need? We need another method. Protected I tile listener event get next. Or we know we're going to call this. We're going to call this peak next. Or peak is what we're going to call it. That is actually a name of a method for queues, I think. So we're going to call this peak. No, we're not going to. We need actually this needs to be I tile event listener re equals peak. Because you need to change the next here, and if you change the next after, you'll get a different result, which is not what you want. So we're going to go if peak equals null, then we want to get our next thing, and if not, we want to return true. There is a next. So in here we want to actually want to go if peak doesn't equal null down here. And this one, what we want to basically do is just iterate forward. Yeah, pretty much. Yep, right here, next up. Okay. This will prevent our iterator from failing because the has next check is important. If you return false on has next, it basically goes, I'm done iterating. So this will work. It does mean we're going to do a double call on this set here, but this code should run in constant time. There should be no n, so it should be n of 1 for those who are familiar, or no, this should be O of 1. Big no notation bullshit, yada. Okay, looking good. Now we just gotta test it. Oh, we forgot one important thing, which is another reason why I wanted to do this. Okay, when we call next, we need to do this. R is instance of I block listener. re dot inject. Okay, so we want to do that real quick. And I want to make another method here, really quick. Why do you keep telling me that? Okay, so this should get us our next slide. To be honest, what we actually could have done with this iterator system is I could have created what is called a sublist or something. We would have got the same result pretty much. And then you could have like faked out a list type system. But the reason why I want to do this is I want to get the last index. So when you call next, I want to get whatever the last returned index was. That's going to be a little tricky to find. Actually, you know what? That shouldn't be too much of a problem. So we should be able to go if get index doesn't equal null. Actually, we don't even need to do a null check there. We want to do this. Because what I need to do is I need to do the eject method real quick to try to clean up after myself. So we want to go get index dot eject. So this would be clean up last call get current listener inject location set next index. And this needs to be set to -1, and so does the next index. Oh no, next index needs to be left at 0. That's fine. No, actually no, -1. Should give me the same result. And then you want to go if index is greater than equal to 0. Return null. That way we aren't checking negatives, because negatives will cause this system to crash. Okay. Yeah, that all looks good. So now we just need to implement this now. So we go here, and this is the placement handler. So what we want to do is we want to create an iterator. So we're going to go listener iterator. It equals new listener iterator. It's not what I typed. World X, Y, Z, this, and then we want placement as our last variable. and we go while it has next. That's where that has next comes into play. We then want to go, okay, itile event listener next equals it dot next, and we want to go if next is an instance of iPlacement listener, and you go next dot on block or on place by, and then you pass in entity living and then item stack, and watch all this code disappear. Boom, gone. That's how simple that is. I got rid of how many lines of code? We'll do this real quick. So that was between 300, so that was 40 lines of code, just got compacted down to 8 lines of code. So that's a really good reduction right there by just simply implementing an iterator. And the beauty of this is the reason why I tell people go learn actual Java at some point when you're being as a mod developer, because you wouldn't be taught this in mod development. Very few mod developers use the fundamental parts of Java, and this is a fundamental part. Everybody uses an iterator. Every time you pass in a list to a for loop, so every time you do this, this is an iterator. So if we actually do this real quick, now we're in hash map. I need to go up here and then go in a list. So a list is a collection, and a collection should be an iterable. So it automatically insists that you must be an iterable. It's got a lot of other things in here. You can actually implement your own collection. You can implement your own list from scratch. So say if I wanted to iterate over every entity inside of a world, I could create an iterator that is specifically designed to get me every entity that is currently logged into the world. I can then tell that iterator, hey, I want only zombies. It will then filter zombies for me automatically. There's tons of things you can do with this if you understand how it functions at the fundamental level. And not just this, there's things like I was talking about sublists. Sublist is a thing that I have yet to actually use, but I know it has potential. So when you take a list and you say you have 100 items in a list, but you only want to iterate between items 20 and 30, you can, instead of copying those out or making a for loop that goes between 20 and 30, you can go, okay, sublist 2030 and then iterate it over as if it was normal. That is a potential possibility that does exist and is fully usable. But anyways, we got to just sit here and implement all of this now. Unfortunately, we haven't tested things, but I insist this must work, so therefore we can actually just implement it. So just have to go through here and do our normal thing. So this needs to be missing a bracket there. And that needs to be next is what that actually needs to be. Cool, get rid of all that. Save so much time, it's going to knock the class file size down. So we were at like 1,000, now we're floating near 800. So we're knocking tons of lines off, because after all, these are average about 80. Is how much each one of these is. And it's pretty good if we can just do this and we can implement this. And the reason I want to also do this is that I want to put listeners in just about every spot. It'll improve flexibility. It unfortunately does actually take a slight overhead on performance. It's not enough that you guys are going to notice, especially with the fact that I do multi-thread my stuff. So I do actually go out of my way to take and put a lot of extra performance modifications so that way things run better than normal, just so I can turn around and do stuff like this. Actually, is there like a return method in there? No. Okay. I think this actually does return a Boolean. So this needs to be, there's a change that needs to be here. So we're going to go if there we go. That had to be implemented, and I'm going to copy this. There needs to be a quantity drop there, like on neighbor changed, on placed on side. Actually, you know what? These should be implemented already. So it should be placement. Okay, one, I need to actually change this. So it should be next dot can place on site. So yeah, that needs to be implemented because that's actually used by the multi-block code. So this will be a Boolean, and what we're looking for with this is we're looking for a false. So we want to go can place equals true, and we want to go okay, can place and. So we want to make sure that way. And we only want to detect for false. So if one of our listeners say we can't place, then we can't place. Actually, you know what? We don't need to even do that. We can just do this. I'm not really thinking that through when I did that. Okay, so that will fix that. And I believe we can do the same thing down here. So it should be can place at. Yeah, we're not even handling activation listeners properly down here. So we want to copy one of the ones that doesn't have all the booleans in it, which is this one. Put this down here. And I have to go find what activation listeners code is, which is activation. I'm gonna probably replace it with an annotation system here later. I don't know. I gotta figure out like the most appropriate way to do that. Okay, so that gets that. So that's on clicked, and then here's a mess. Yeah, I need to add handling for the GUIs for listeners. I need to add for wrenches. But right now we're going to handle the else statement, which is going to be just on activation. So we want to go, okay, on player activation, player side, hit X, hit Y, hit Z. This is important for the multi-block code. And then we got to do a Boolean system here. So we're going to go Boolean. Actually, you know what? No, we're good. We're going to do this. By the way, calling your methods re is not advisable. I'm just doing it right now because of sheer laziness. It's actually not the way you're supposed to do things, because you're going to come back through and go like, what the f is re? This would be, go ahead and change it actually. Activated. And yeah, there we go. So this is our activation handler for our listeners. Then we got to do GUIs later, which I'll figure out how to do. Actually, the way we'll probably handle the GUIs is I'm trying to think of actually how to do that. Because the thing is, a listener really doesn't need to be a GUI tile. GUI tile is pretty much obsolete once the listener system comes into play. Well, no, it's not obsolete actually, but it's not something we can put on the listeners because it does intentionally check for the tile system. We can do the wrench listener here, but tile listener can't handle. Yeah, we gotta. There's a bit of a mess right here. We'll go ahead and implement it because I kind of need to, but there's a bit of handling that has to be handled, and so it's not as simple as we just want to know if we're wrench listener. We need to call certain methods. So you want to go, okay, we want to know if we can handle a wrench right click. So we need to do this right here, except this is going to be next. We're going to get rid of, actually we'll leave the tile there, we don't want to remove it. Okay, so we want to know if the thing that's in the player's hand is a wrench. We then want to know if we activated it. We then need to handle this. So activation is actually here, equals true. We don't want to return. We don't want to damage the wrench every single time, and actually we want to put this up here. And this needs to be next, not tile. So we know if we can handle right click on wrench. We want to go right quickly here, and we want to go if activated. Then you want to damage the wrench. You only want to damage the wrench once per right click, not like 15 if you have 15 wrench handlers. So that should work, because that'll still handle. So if our tile implements iWrench listener, the tile still gets wrench listener. If the node implements listener, it gets its handling for it. And we don't have to worry about this whole junk system. And we'll replace that with this as well. So you saw, if like the last video, I made a method here which actually will get me the node or the tile, but it doesn't give me both. And technically, I want to iterate both. So that means the GUI tile system could have some weird effects to it, but shouldn't have to worry about that. The rest of the stuff down here, I don't think we even have listeners for. Actually, we have listeners for icons, but I'm going to leave those alone right now. I'll come back to those. And I need to do the redstone stuff here later. I'm not even going to mess with the rain thing. It's literally, there's nothing that uses it. It's everything else that needs to be handled. Okay, so I got to do the on added. Okay, that gets rid of a lot of code there. And I guess we can do the resistance check. Surprised that's not actually, it probably can't be handled properly. So this is resistance. I need to make static variables for all this stuff so I'm not misspelling it. And this will be I resistance listener. And then we need to go next dot get explosive resistance entity explosion X, explosion Y, explosion Z. There's some cool stuff I actually want to do with this system here later. By simply knowing where the explosion is, I could make blocks that resist explosion damage from a certain direction. It would be really cool to play with. Oh. Huh. That gets to be left how it is, because there's no location. Although I think this one's called always. I think this one is almost never called. Might as well do the rain. We will use it eventually, just not right now. It's amazing I even have a listener for it. I think like there's like very, very few things that actually would give a crap about rain, and those are usually like cauldrons or things that are specifically designed to deal with rain, like detectors. I think lava. I guess lava could deal with it. Hardness listener used to be implemented still. Yeah, we're pretty much good there. That does everything. And we knocked ourselves down, well, not by a huge amount. We only took 200 lines off. When you consider the fact of how many more methods I got to implement, that we actually probably saved closer to like 500 to 600, considering that there's tons of methods still left to implement. I got no way to test these, but we'll launch Minecraft and see if we crash. That's the best way to test. I'll probably go through later and I'll make JUnit tests for all this stuff, because after all, I want to make sure that all the listeners work. The iterator, like the inventory iterator, for example, is heavily JUnit tested because it failed at some point in time, and I failed to test it, and because of that, we had a couple glitches, and I think there was a few exploits that came out of that. So JUnit testing is important if you ever make your own mods. Take the time to learn JUnit. It is really easy. If you don't want to learn JUnit, the alternative to it is just make a main method. In that main method, just call your code. So make an entity, make him do things. It's literally what JUnit does. JUnit is just a sophisticated version of making your own program to test your stuff. The only advantage of JUnit is it gives you this really nice display, and it'll tell you everything you're doing. And fuck Spectrum. They're my current internet provider, if you couldn't guess by now. So here's what happened. So Spectrum bought out Time Warner in the area. So Time Warner was my previous ISP. I didn't like Time Warner either, but I kind of regret them going because they were better. And the reason I say this is Spectrum pulled this really dirty trick. So we were getting like some 100 TV channels, and we were getting like 60 down, 10 up. And they're like, hey, you're available for an upgrade, do the upgrade. We didn't do the upgrade because we're like, well, we like what we got. We now have 5 TV channels, 10 up, 2 down. 10 down, 2 up. They cut all of our services, and we still pay the same price. So we had a 600% reduction in our internet capabilities, and we had a significant reduction in our TV. And it really sucks because, I already lost TV channels when I moved to start with. So I had like 200 TV channels previously, things like CNN. I actually enjoyed watching CNN every morning. Even if I don't like their bullshit, it was entertaining. I don't know how to actually describe that. You can't exactly say you love a news network. Most of them these days are horrible. And they've gotten pretty bad. Like I used to watch them back a couple years back, and they were okay. You got some decent news out of them. I have seen some of their more recent broadcasts, and they're as bad as the other news networks in the way that crappy news gets more attention. Like they spend so much time talking about terrorist events and stuff, and they do a horrible job at portraying the details too. They're always portraying certain people certain ways, and they're not being neutral. They're being incredibly biased. And anytime it's not like, for example, Trump comes up, they're incredibly biased one way or the other. And me being an independent, I don't like to listen about Democrat-only stuff, and I don't like to listen about Republican-only stuff. I want to hear honest news, and that's really, really hard to get. It's the reason why I avoid also putting politics on my channels. I also avoid politics on my Twitter and stuff, because I know there's other people that don't like that either. But back to Minecraft, because that's what you guys are here for. So we're going to test this, hopefully get this all set up, and I get more listeners in here. The goal is to build a prototype that is so strong in its flexibility that I could potentially give this to Lex and see if he likes it enough to go throw it in Forge. Because imagine making mods with only listeners, because this thought actually occurred to me, is that you could make and replicate entire pieces of functionality with listeners alone. You wouldn't need anything else. If I wanted to make a chest, I can throw a GUI listener on it. I can throw an inventory listener on it. I can just keep throwing these different listeners on it. I can do some code injections. So, of course, if you want a chest, you're going to need an inventory system. So you can throw a template builder that builds your inventory. But that's the only thing you need. The tile chest literally is almost event-driven by itself. Almost everything, all your method calls are events, is how you can perceive them. I have a feeling there's programming languages out here that are specifically designed this way. And I'm kind of making Java do this. And the thing is, I got this idea from Java too. If any of you guys have seen GUI systems, they are heavily listener-based. All your mouse clicks are listener-based. All of your GUI resizes are listener-based. And I'm like, you know what? Why don't I just do this with mods? There's no difference, and the overhead is really minimum. I mean, we're running pretty good here. And the only reason I'm not running at full frame rate right now is my computer's just kind of playing the sluggish game. So if we actually open up the task manager, which is on my other screen, I'm maxing out not because of Java, because Java's only using like 20% of one core. It's just everything else is running on my computer is being sluggish. But yeah, so we got this here. So what we want to do is I'm going to go really quickly debug line the placement thing. Really quickly mute my mic to cough. Always seems to happen to me when I'm drinking some kind of diet soda. I get the cough like that. I was too lazy to actually clean a cup out this morning to make tea or anything. So we want to hit this line. And we click place, and it debugged there. At least that's what it should have done. Don't tell me it crashed. Illegal argument. Wah. We crashed on a completely unrelated section. No, we actually didn't crash. We did freeze though. But I'm not getting a debug freeze. It just literally stalled. Um, okay, that's new. Why is it trying to produce a tile modular inventory? Let me, oh, that's why. One of those dumb things where old code is running. Why? Pause. You're clearly running right now. You're ticking blocks. Something happened. I feel like we just infinite looped. I'm gonna hit crash and just force it to crash. Let's really quickly go through each of the silos and figure out what they're doing. They've got the wrong inventory providers, which actually probably did crash something. The thing is, I actually could force this behavior real quick, but I'm not gonna. I could simply say, okay, I want everything to be an external inventory, but it's, that's not the way you handle this stuff. So that's standard silo. I need the launcher, which is up here somewhere. Content, ICBM, launcher, standard. Do you even have an inventory? Oh, okay, you're a wrapper tile. I'm looking at the wrong thing. I mean, you'd imagine this thing should have an inventory. Because it's kind of required. Sorta. Probably because it's already implemented here somewhere. Probably already on the container. Yeah, right here. I don't know why the tiles are implementing their own stuff. It's like this whole thing. Goodbye. And we can go do that with the other silo. Like, see how much code just disappears out of these things when you finally get them all prefabbed out? Okay, you're the wrapper. I want this thing. So like literally the only thing we have left here is can accept a missile and can place on side and drop the missile when we remove it. This can be turned into a listener. This can be turned into a listener. And this more than likely could just be turned into a metadata thing. I actually am tempted to merge the silos with each other and make them one block, because that is now a thing I can do. With the JSON system implemented out, I don't have to worry about the old tile system. The old tile system was specifically designed so each tile was a single block. The new system, I don't have to do that. I can do whatever I want now. I'm not limited by the old way of doing things. This leaves me a lot of freedom and possibility, but I gotta baby step it for a while. The likelihood of what's going to happen is that I am probably going to merge the two of them together and make them into one system. They will still be two independent classes, so these classes will still be here and that won't change. But then they'll be the same block, so we'll save a block ID. I don't know if I'm going to do the medium and large launchers as silos, because those are more than likely going to be implemented via the launcher system. The launcher is a non-multi-block structure. It's a little confusing to say, but there are parts in it that are part of the structure, but are not multi-blocks themselves. With the multi-block structure, every part of it is a multi-block, except for the host, which is this tile, of course. So I'm probably gonna do it that way because then you build a structural frame and then you can use whatever structural frame you want. There's no limitation. A lot of other tiles do that way. Should be good. I should be able to relaunch. I gotta clean up this debug here. Okay, tester running. I wonder if build runs before or after I run the code generators. Actually, interesting thought process. Can I actually force it to build? Okay. That'll force it to rebuild every single time we go to launch. That might not be a smart idea though. We're going to test it eventually. Not maybe this next run, but you guys will see it down the road. I'll probably complain about it somehow. This will launch, we get to test it, and then as soon as I get a test to see if the new listener system runs, I'll end this. I gotta go do a business meeting here in a bit anyways. And by business meeting, it's just a team meeting. For all those that are going like, oh no, you're incorporating. I actually am not yet. That will happen eventually. So BuiltBrokenModding and Gaming will eventually become a company. It will remain as a community-based run, almost open source, not quite open source company. It's weird how we're going to figure this out. I still have to talk to people and figure out how exactly I'm supposed to do this because I don't want to be a nonprofit. I don't want to be a charity because in reality we're still generating some kind of revenue from this. But it's going to be mostly community run. So members of the community are going to kind of organize and run things. I don't know if we'll ever be able to pay anybody from the community because to be honest, we can't even pay ourselves at the moment. But down the road we'll incorporate it. Probably LLC actually is what's going to actually happen. So legal YB, whatever the hell it's called. Probably be founded somewhere closer to a partnership than an actual system. Because right now I've got a sole proprietor business right now, which is my freelancing work. But the modding thing needs to be separated, and then there's going to be a studio, which is going to be doing the games. But the modding thing will always remain close to open source. The reason why I say not open source is because after watching what happened to Bucket and a few other mod developers and stuff, I am slightly afraid of open source projects now. I like to make sure that you guys can do whatever you want with my code. And by whatever I mean within reason, because I don't want somebody picking one of my mods up and then going and selling it for money. I don't want somebody picking my mod up and re-texturing it and saying it's theirs. I do want anybody who wants to learn to be able to take my code and learn from it. Actually get better, improve. So educational use I'm always happy with. Ah, man, they're just spamming those emails. So be able to learn from things and do stuff like that. And this is where I usually label it as visible source, so you can see the code, but you can't take ownership of the code, you can't copy the code, you can't redistribute the code, all the stuff to protect the project and stuff. And it means every time somebody contributes to the project, that code then belongs to the organization. So any code I actually write for the organization belongs to the organization within reason. I actually maintain partial ownership of it in order for me to go take that code and go use it somewhere else. But complicated things, I don't even understand half of it myself. That's the reason why eventually I want to get a lawyer and actually ask him questions and get him to write up proper documentation for the organization and all the fun things. And if I place this, is it gonna debug line? Why am I not getting a debug line here? There is an infinite loop somewhere. Pause. Where you at? Where is your call chain? There's an infinite loop here. It has next. If peak equals null, next iterator. Yeah, that is stupid of me. Okay, so what we need to do here is we need to go next index is greater than some stupid number. Greater than 2 and so what we're gonna do is we're gonna kill this real quick because this is not gonna infinite loop no matter what I do to it. I'm gonna figure out what our max size is real quick. So we know we have 2 elements by default. So we've got element 0 and element 1. So those are our first 2 elements. And reason why we insist they're there is because their indexes don't change. The next thing is we want to go, okay, if block-based dot get listeners, block-based listeners dot contains key. Then we're going to go size plus equals block-based dot listeners dot get key dot size, and we want to repeat this for our tile. So we're going to go if get tile ID instance of I tile I tile with listeners. Okay, there we go. Then we want to there we go. You know what? I'm just going to copy this from down here. Doesn't equal null. We wanted to go size plus equals listener list dot size. So that'll get us our actual size. And what we want to do is we want to go and next index is less than size. Because if we go over our size, so if we only really have like one object in there, we can only write it twice, and it'll go, you know what, we have nothing. And that's what we want to do. By the way, I don't know why my university keeps spamming those things. They force us to do all the dumb stuff, so like sexual harassment, like rape, all that awareness stuff. But they make you do it so often that it's becoming bothersome. I mean, I'm all for education and stuff on that, but when you have to fill out surveys almost monthly, and it's starting to feel prejudice type because it's primarily focused at male students and not female students, when the fact is things like that happen to both genders. Not in equal numbers, but it does happen to both genders, but it seems to be primarily focused towards one gender versus the other, and it's annoying. And again, I've got pepper sprayed for that very reason too. By the way, that shit burns. For those who want to know what the story behind that one is, I was walking around campus and I went to go through a doorway and apparently I startled somebody and they pulled pepper spray out and sprayed me in the eyes. And then kicked me a couple times too and ran away. Didn't do anything. Was completely lost on campus myself, by the way, because I was a couple weeks into me going to Columbus State, and that campus is massive. Not the biggest campus I've ever seen, but it's easy to get lost if you don't know where you're at. And I had got lost, and I was roaming around. I think I was near the art area, which was a couple blocks down from where I should have been. And yeah. Then again, other students at that campus have had the same thing happen though. It's dumb. That campus is one that needed awareness. They never had any. Franklin has way too much of it. Columbus State had almost none. Actually, you know what? They probably have it now, because I think this whole awareness thing is mandatory by law now, which is a reason why I'm probably guessing my university does it way too much, is they're trying to stay within their legal limitations, and they're trying to ensure that students get it constantly. So each semester we probably have to redo it. And they're the basic questions too. Like if one of your friends is harmed, what do you want to go do? And it's like go find an adult, pretty much. I'm using that word as a what is whatever, it doesn't matter. But you go find somebody that you can tell about it, and et cetera, et cetera. Make sure you keep the person's confidence and help them out, and yeah, et cetera. Yeah, I actually didn't pay attention as much as I should have to that, because there's an actual set of rules and guidelines, and I've got it downloaded on my phone in case I ever need it. But I don't exactly have it memorized. Speaking of phone, I'm getting spammed with texts already. So one reason why I don't really like recording later in the evening is because that's when everybody's awake and active. I was hopeful that I was going to get up early in the morning and do a whole bunch of these recordings, but I didn't get to sleep again. This is sort of loading. Yeah, I'll try to avoid bringing up subjects like I just brought up. I'm just bored looking for something to talk about. Because that whole thing is like, there's so many things wrong with our society when we've got a lot of issues like that. And they're self-propagating issues too. They're not things like, there's a word for it. I forget the psychology definition for it. But they're issues that the more you pay attention to them, the worse they get. Not because you're seeing more, but because literally making awareness for the subject is actually becoming hurtful instead of helpful. Though not in the case of that assault one. That one's fine. I'm actually more thinking of feminism and a few other things, which I'm all in support for it. Or there's actually, I think I'm using the term wrong. I need more sleep. That's all I know. There's a term for it, and etc. Back to modding, because that's what I do know a lot about. Pretend less I know about psychology, because I studied that for a couple semesters and then I noped out of it because that shit is weird. You study psychology and you find out very quickly that human beings are broken in so many ways. That there is no such thing as normal. There is no such thing as sane. Okay, there we go. We fixed it, so it's not infinite looping anymore. What we want to do is we just kind of want to work our way through here. So our size is index. Okay, we get size of 2. We have a size of 3. We have no listeners. So we now have 3 things. So it should go, our next index should now be 0. Why is our next, oh, well. I guess our tile is not an instance of placeable, whatever. We go next, so we know we have a next element now. So our first list object is tile silo. Look at that, it's working. And we get our on placement block call, which is probably handled. Here's our multi-block listener, which is exactly what we want, which doesn't implement that. Cool. So our system, which we did, it took us an hour to test this, but it's working. We just have to figure out why the multi-block structure isn't working, which is, I'll do in another video. So I'm going to end this one. I'm probably going to make a video of that business meeting I got, which that meeting is going to be, we're talking over game design and stuff. If it turns out good, I'll upload it. A lot of those I just don't upload because we jump between game design and to other subjects and back and forth. Usually those other subjects end up being politics, like the fact that North Korea is retarded, Trump is not much better. China is actually for once being the good guy, which is scary when you think about it. They're actually being more of an adult than the US is being. And that's hard to admit. Etc., etc. So yeah, another video another time.